Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace. Coming at you, it's Tuesday, July 8th, and we are already a full week into the 2025 NBA free agency cycle. Tons of significant signings that we have to talk about, some major trades as well. I wanted to get this out about a week ago, to be honest with you. I wanted to cover everything that happened during the first 48 hours or so of NBA free agency, but life got in the way a little bit. I did have to travel home. As you can tell, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm not in my normal studio. Coming at you from my parents' basement, and had some fun plans for the 4th, some other pretty significant stuff that happened since then, so wasn't able to get this out on time. Hopefully you guys will forgive me. And I do understand that, look, a lot of you guys, if you're listening to this podcast, you are big NBA fans. A lot of this might be old news to you. Maybe you were subscribed to Sham's notifications on Twitter or whatnot, so you're seeing all the deals as they're rolling in. But a few deals have changed, right? There have been some updates to some trades, some new deals that have taken place within the last couple of days, and I just wanted to make it a little bit more fun when we're talking about free agency, right? So, as you can tell by the title of the episode, I am going to go through my free agency superlatives, so giving out awards for best move, worst contract, things of that nature, just to keep things a little bit more exciting, and summarize the most important deals that you should know as an NBA fan, and have a little bit more in-depth conversations on those. And then I'll just list out a bunch of other random transactions that I thought were notable if you guys are fans of the league. And then finally, at the end of the podcast, we are just going to go through my top 3 winners and my top 3 losers of the NBA offseason so far. Again, it's mid to early July right about now. A lot can change between now and the start of the season, so understanding this is not final, but I did want to give an accurate look at where we're at. Gone through the NBA draft. We've gone through the first week of NBA free agency. Most of these deals have happened, so loaded podcast today. Let's not waste any more time and get right into it. So let's start things off by running through a bunch of deals that weren't quite worthy of winning one of my NBA free agent superlative awards, but still relevant enough where I felt like I should mention them, right? If you guys are NBA fans, you should care about these deals. They do have a real impact on some relevant teams, and so I just wanted to fly through this list and not spend more than 30 seconds on any one of these transactions independently. Let's see if I can actually stick to that. But let's start off with D'Angelo Russell to the Dallas Mavericks on a 2-year, $13 million contract. Was actually talking about this with a few of my teammates at work before I left, and I basically summarized it by saying, look, if you believe in winning players, D'Angelo Russell probably isn't one of them, but I think for the price that they paid, it's pretty fair, right? To get him on like a $6.5 million contract for 2 years, they really needed to find somebody to fill that hole in the point guard position, especially while Kyrie Irving is rehabbing. We don't know when we're going to see him, probably not until halfway through the year. And I think D'Angelo Russell's better than other options that they had, like just keeping guys like Spencer Dinwiddie. And look, he obviously has some chemistry with Anthony Davis. I think he can have a pretty high ceiling game to game. He's just really inconsistent. The lows are pretty low. But for a team that's just trying to stay afloat in a loaded Western Conference without a primary ball handler in Kyrie Irving, hopefully D'Angelo Russell can do a suitable job. And I think for the price they paid, it's worth the risk. Next deal we want to talk about, Lonzo Ball was actually traded from the Chicago Bulls to the Cleveland Cavaliers in exchange for Isaac Okoro. So the Bulls have really trademarked these one-for-one player swap, no other players in the deal, no other assets whatsoever. Who believes in getting any draft picks anyway? Certainly not the Chicago Bulls, right? I do think it's a downgrade for them. I just know that Okoro, pretty high pick, pretty high lottery pick a couple years back, but plus defender just has proved that he's not reliable enough in the playoffs when the Cavs need him the most. And I know there were a lot of disappointing Cavs on last year's team, and so Okoro shouldn't take all the blame for that, but he certainly wasn't helping them beat Indiana in the playoffs last year. At least Lonzo addresses the hole that Ty Jerome, who we're going to talk more about in a little bit. He did leave the Cleveland Cavaliers, so they needed to find a backup point guard, and I think the ceiling of what Lonzo Ball can be, despite all the injuries, is much higher than Isaac Okoro. So I just don't understand why the Bulls would want to go out and get another wing that they're not quite sure what he can be in Okoro when they already had a guy with a higher ceiling. But, you know, if you want to point to Lonzo's injuries over the years and just say that he wasn't going to be reliable either, I get it, but I do like this deal for the Cleveland Cavaliers, don't like it for the Chicago Bulls. Davion Mitchell with the Miami Heat signed a 2-year, $24 million contract extension. This one was pretty cool to see. I know Davion Mitchell bounced around a lot. He felt like a Miami guy, like an obvious fit for that team, for that culture when the Heat got him. And immediately it was a pretty great fit. I know the Heat had a disappointing season, but he was awesome down the stretch and massive for them. Even making it to the playoffs, the fact that they were able to win in the play-in tournament was a lot to do with how good Davion Mitchell was during those games. And I think $12 million a year for 2 years for a guy in the prime of his career is a fine price to pay. Sam Merrill, big payday in Cleveland, 4 years, $38 million. Apparently, Donovan Mitchell really liked the guy. Obviously, he's a knockdown shooter. That's all he's really going to do. And if you can knock down threes at an above-average level in an NBA game, you are going to get paid. We've seen that time and time again. Sam Merrill is no exception to that rule right there. Another relevant contract for your defending champion Oklahoma City Thunder. 3 years, $24 million for Jalen Williams. So again, that's J-Will, the other Jalen Williams that comes off the bench for the Oklahoma City Thunder. $8 million a year for 3 years is a really fair price to pay. Again, good for him. I believe he was like a second-round pick. The fact that that guy made it to his second contract, obviously massive achievement for him and his family. And he's a very solid backup big. Like, I know he didn't play much in the Western Conference Finals, didn't play much in the NBA Finals either, but he was pretty important for OKC to get through Denver, just having a big body that could stay in front of Jokic, use some fouls. They're likely going to face the Nuggets in the playoffs again. They're still going to need Jalen Williams, and that guy has been very productive when he has been asked to play starter minutes. So, like that contract a lot for Jalen Williams and the Thunder. Another deal that was pretty interesting here, Nurkic was traded to the Utah Jazz in exchange for Colin Sexton and a second-round pick. Don't understand this one at all for the Jazz. The fact that they gave up, in my opinion, the more talented player in Colin Sexton. Like, Nurkic, it feels like his value was kind of in the basement. They needed to attach a pick just to get rid of him from Phoenix. So the fact that they were able to get Sexton in a second is just one that I'm still trying to wrap my mind around. I didn't know if that meant that Walker Kessler was going to be on the move, or they just really felt the need for more front court depth for whatever reason. But I think that's a sneaky, really good pickup for Charlotte to go out and get Colin Sexton, a guy that they know plays hard, and a guy that can be a leader and a veteran in that locker room. Like that a lot for the Hornets. Don't really understand it at all for the Jazz. Moving on, James Harden got a contract extension, 2 years, $81 million. I think he had a player option that he eventually declined just because he was able to stretch that out for an extra year. Roughly same ballpark money he would have been making if he just picked up that option, but I do think Harden deserved it, right? He was All-NBA this year. He was awesome during the regular season. Obviously, he didn't do anything to put to rest the Game 7 bugaboos. Had another really bad performance at the end of round 1 right there, but he did have some moments earlier in that season, and I think just as far as the number of guys on this planet that can be the engines of an efficient NBA offense, I don't know how long that list is. It's probably only like 10 to 12 players, and Harden is still one of them, even though he is getting older. So I think 2 years, $81 million isn't terrible for a Clippers team that is still committed to going all in until this contract ends up and until the Kawhi contract ends as well. They're kind of pot committed anyway, so I like that move to re-sign Harden. Great deal here in Milwaukee, 3 years, $44 million for Bobby Portis, one of the more productive bench players in the NBA, point blank period. So I know a lot is up in the air for the Bucks, but that is a solid contract, and if they need to trade it, 3 years, $44 million for Bobby Portis, I think that's completely fair for both sides. Moving on, we had another trade that actually just broke yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. Norm Powell was sent to the Miami Heat, John Collins was sent to the Los Angeles Clippers, and Kyle Anderson and Kevin Love and a second-round pick were sent to the Utah Jazz. So this one I like quite a bit for the Miami Heat, like the fact that they were able to package together some bench players and Kyle Anderson and Kevin Love, and I'm assuming that was Miami's second-round pick just to get Norm Powell. I know he makes a decent amount of money, but I think that's a really solid pickup for a guy that's going to fit in nicely in Miami. I don't really get it as much for the Clippers. I know that they need some front court depth, but they did sign Brook Lopez, which we're going to talk more about. They still have Zubac there, so I don't really know why they would be so eager to swap Norm Powell for John Collins. I know Collins is on an expiring contract as well, so that gives them some flexibility after this year, but I've never been a huge John Collins guy, so I don't really get it. And it does just feel like the Jazz are trying to stack assets, trying to reduce the amount of money on their books, so the fact that they were able to pick up a second-round pick and move on from Collins' contract was probably their incentive there. So overall, I like that deal. Norm Powell going to Miami, I like it the most for the Heat in that situation. Sneaky, really good contract we have right here. Day'Ron Sharpe re-signed with the Brooklyn Nets. 2 years, $12 million. A lot of you guys might not know much about Day'Ron Sharpe. Dude is a menace on the glass. On the offensive glass in particular, has flashes of an outside shot from time to time, but overall is just a great rebounder, massive body, solid on the defensive end of the court. You know, $6 million a year, 2 for 12, like that is really, really cheap, especially for the market for centers right now. I don't understand how the Lakers aren't able to overpay and bring in a guy like that just to have more depth in the front court. Spoiler alert, we're not done talking about the Lakers here, but that's just one that felt like a lot of teams could have pounced on it, but good for the Nets for re-signing their guy for the cheap, 2 years, $12 million, and he will have a trade market for Day'Ron Sharpe if the Nets decide to move on from him or Nick Claxton. Keeping it moving with the rapid fire here, let's talk about Jaren Jackson Jr. and the Memphis Grizzlies because Triple J signed a 5-year, $240 maxed extension. Could have been for even more if Jaren Jackson ended up winning, I believe, another Defensive Player of the Year, or if he went on to make an All-NBA team this past year. He kind of just missed the cut on that. He was on a lot of people's All-NBA teams on that third team this past year. Ultimately didn't make it, saved the Grizzlies some money. And look, they were consistent ever since that Bane trade, saying that they wanted to keep Triple J and Ja Morant as the centerpieces of this roster, so at least they were able to stick to that. Good for Triple J for getting that money as well. Was worth noting that I think he had a weird knee or foot injury from some non-sanctioned basketball that he was playing over the past couple of weeks. And that news was announced basically right after that extension came out, so I do wonder if the Grizzlies knew how hurt he was, knew what happened, whatever. I mean, it does sound like the guy was just playing somewhere in the offseason, so that stuff does happen, but just kind of fascinating timing. I wonder if Memphis regrets any part of that, but nonetheless, Triple J, I was a lot higher on him this year, and I think that contract makes sense, and it is something that we saw coming. Keeping it moving to another Memphis transaction, 3 years, $52 million for Santi Aldama. Of course, they re-signed Aldama after a career best year for him, being a really great scorer for them off the bench, really great size on him, can shoot the ball. I do think 3 years, $52 million is a little rich for my liking. I was kind of late to come around on Aldama, but at this point, Memphis just hits on so many draft picks, it's kind of hard to straighten them all out and which ones are better than others. I'm sure he would have been a mid-level type of guy for other teams out there, so Memphis paid a little bit over that mark. So I don't necessarily hate it, but I still don't really have any faith in Memphis as an organization that they're going to be able to figure this out and become a real contender within the next few years. So we'll see. At least that Aldama deal is ultimately pretty tradable. We have a Lakers transaction for you guys. Jake LaRavia signed a 2-year, $12 million contract. I like that move. I think for the value, again, $6 million a year for a guy that has shown flashes. I think he's only played a full 2 years in the NBA, so obviously he has a lot to develop left as well. He'll fit right in with Austin Reeves and Dalton Connect there in LA, if you guys know what I'm talking about. But either way, solid signing for the Lakers. KPJ returned to the Bucks, Kevin Porter Jr., that is 1 year, $11 million. They really need KPJ, especially with no Damian Lillard next year. They have a really obvious lack of ball handlers, and at least KPJ, putting his off-the-court issues to the side, gives you a real ceiling with him as a ball handler, with as a scorer, as a shot creator. That guy can be really fun to watch. So 1 year, $11 million for a dude in the prime of his career, that seems pretty fair to me. This was a real head-scratcher out of New Orleans. We had Kevon Looney leaving the Golden State Warriors, where he spent the entirety of his career, to sign a 2-year, $16 million contract with the New Orleans Pelicans. So, $8 million a year for Looney. I never really understood Looney even in Golden State. I know he was a really smart player, great screener, solid rebounder, but he's undersized, can't really shoot, not really sure what he's giving you individually on the offensive end of the court. So, to see a guy that the Golden State Warriors, who have been the staple of really high IQ basketball over the past decade, they were willing to let that guy go. Obviously, they really liked Looney. I just really question how he is going to improve as a basketball player when he gets to the Pelicans. I know they didn't pay much to get him, and they just maybe needed a veteran in that locker room or something. But beyond that, I don't know what Kevon Looney brings, especially outside of that Golden State system. So don't really understand that one for the Pelicans. A deal I like for the Pistons here, we have Karis LeVert signing a 2-year, $29 million deal. LeVert comes off the bench. LeVert can get buckets, and Detroit had some cap space that they were willing to burn, and so they get a guy that can give you a decent defense and give you pretty high energy and production on offense. So I think I like that contract for the Pistons. Again, that's 2 years, $29 million for Karis LeVert. Brook Lopez is on the move, leaving the Milwaukee Bucks. He is signing with the Los Angeles Clippers. 2 years, $18 million contract. I know Lopez is super old, but he's still a great floor spacer, still a solid rim protector. That foot speed is going pretty quick at this point in his career, being a lot older, but I still think a lot of my Clippers friends would back me up in saying this. I think he's probably the best backup big that they've had for Zubac in a long time, so I think that's a pretty significant signing there and a pretty honest price to pay for a veteran like Brook Lopez. Trey Jones signed a 3-year, $27 million contract to stay in Chicago. So the Bulls definitely love where they're at, being completely mid at everything, and they bring back Trey Jones to help them continue with that goal. That is a little harsh for Trey Jones. I think I actually really like the guy as a backup point guard. 3 years, $27 million, $9 million a year. I think that's a fine contract. I just don't like talking about the Bulls. So we're going to keep it pushing to Trey Jones' brother, Tyus Jones, who signed a 1-year, $7 million contract with the Magic. Love this signing. Couldn't quite shoehorn it into an award, but I do think Tyus Jones is a really solid player. Orlando needed ball handlers bad. I think they now have like 3 extra guards on the roster this year that would have been their best guard in the playoffs last year. Obviously, that includes Desmond Bane and another player that we need to talk about on the Magic. But 1 year's $7 million for Tyus Jones. Can't beat that. Like that signing a lot for the Magic. Jordan Clarkson, it's announced that he is almost certainly going to be signing with the Knicks once he clears waivers. I think he was bought out by the Jazz. And so no idea what that contract's going to end up being, but it's pretty safe to assume Clarkson's going to end up in New York, which, again, Thibodeau doesn't like playing that bench, but down the stretch, he needed to in the playoffs. It seems like the game is changing. You need to have a little bit deeper roster for these long playoff runs, and at least New York has an extra guy that they can depend on to get you some buckets off the bench. So Clarkson to the Knicks, I like that. The Knicks weren't done there, though. They did sign Gershon Yabusele for a 2-year, $12 million contract. Again, like it a lot. Yabo was really productive for the Sixers last year. Asked him to do a lot more than probably what they were expecting heading into last year after all the injuries, but I think the guy can play at a high level, can shoot the ball at a decent clip, gives you some solid minutes at the 4, and could maybe even get away with him as like a backup 5 if you really needed to, but I like that signing for the Knicks. Bit of an overpay here for the Detroit Pistons, in my opinion. They paid Duncan Robinson a 3-year, $48 million contract. Obviously, Robinson's been on some great teams in Miami. He's been known to go through some deep playoff runs with a proven organization, but defensively, there's definitely some concerns there. He's getting a little bit older at this point. He's still a great shooter, but even at times, he seemed to be like in and out of the Heat's rotation for the past couple of years. So 3 years, $48 million. I know that the Pistons had that money kind of marked down for somebody else that was on their roster last year that we're going to talk about later, but I just feel like that's a little bit of an overpay for Duncan Robinson. But nonetheless, you still get some guaranteed shooting around Cade Cunningham, which is ultimately what unlocked him last year, what took the team to another level. So it's not going to blow up in your face entirely unless he gets hurt or something like that, but I do think that's a bit rich for Duncan Robinson. A deal that I actually really like for the Indiana Pacers, they traded for Jay Huff for a second-round pick and then an additional second-round pick swap. So barely anything in to pay for Jay Huff, who was a backup big for the Grizzlies last year, who can stretch the floor, protect the rim, sneaky, a little bit more athletic than you might think. I mean, the Pacers needed a big man desperately because, spoiler alert, they lost Miles Turner, who we're going to be talking about in a little bit, but I do like them buying Jay Huff for that low from Memphis. I think that's a great price to pay. And the final piece of rapid-fire news, Paolo Banchero of the Orlando Magic is likely to sign a 5-year maximum extension for $287 million. So that's crazy. I don't think that's technically a supermax, right? Because Paolo didn't make an All-NBA team, but either way, it is the most money that Paolo could sign for. He is extension eligible, and I knew that the Magic would offer him that contract because Paolo is going to be a pretty special player. Now it's time for the fun stuff. Let's talk about my NBA free agency superlatives. So if you're wondering what a superlative is, it's an award. Think back to high school. You know, you had best dressed, class clown, most likely to succeed, things of those natures, right? So I tried to recycle some of those superlatives into NBA free agency this year, right? I didn't make it a one-to-one fit. I'm not going to go through all of the superlatives that they gave out at your high school, but I think I hit on a bunch of them, and I made it a pretty fun gimmick overall. So let's start off with one that's not a real superlative, but an award that I needed to give out nonetheless. The most impactful move, right? Out of all of the trades of the NBA offseason, which one do I think is going to be the most impactful when it's all said and done? And the one that came to mind for me as I sit here and record on July 8th, the Nuggets trading Michael Porter Jr. in a 2032 unprotected first-round pick to the Brooklyn Nets in exchange for Cam Johnson. So again, MPJ and a 2032 unprotected first-round pick. It is crazy when those picks get traded that many years out. Like, that just feels like hard to wrap your mind around what the league is going to look like in 2032, but it is a real first-round pick nonetheless, and an unprotected first-round pick at that. So MPJ, unprotected first, headed to Brooklyn in exchange for Cam Johnson. So the reason I like this move for the Nuggets so much is it is an upgrade at a spot that they desperately needed during this recent postseason run. Now, to be fair to Michael Porter Jr., he had a very significant shoulder injury on his shooting shoulder. Definitely made his job a lot harder, right? Who knows how productive Michael Porter Jr. would have been had he been healthy during that playoff run, right? Could that have been enough to swing that series against the Thunder? I don't know, but I think either way, whether we're looking at healthy Michael Porter Jr. or not, I still think Cam Johnson is an upgrade, and he's definitely an upgrade to the Nuggets because he makes less money than Michael Porter Jr., right? He was on one of those like max contract extensions that whatever MPJ was eligible for, he got from the Nuggets a couple years back. Cam Johnson makes a little bit less, and I believe that did drop the Nuggets below that second apron, so that gave them a little bit more flexibility to do some other moves that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. So it is a 2032 first-round pick the Nuggets sent out the door, but in exchange they get a guy that is more dependable, just a little bit smarter of an overall basketball player, and they get some financial flexibility as well. I just think it's a no-brainer home run for the Nuggets. The fact that they only had to attach one pick to get rid of Michael Porter Jr. and his contract, and then they get back the Nets' best asset on paper, like that is a steal. It really is, especially for a Nuggets team that we saw, again, they were one game away from beating the Thunder, made it to game 7 in round 2. They came up short. Obviously, that game was a blowout, but they dealt with a couple injuries, just felt like they were a guy short. And I think getting a guy in Cam Johnson who is very similar to Michael Porter Jr., right? They're both well above average three-point shooters. I think Cam Johnson is a little bit more consistent as a basketball player, probably gives you a little bit more basketball IQ, and defensively probably gives you a bit more. You know, maybe you miss those random, like, 10 rebound games from MPJ just because he is so damn tall, and he can really just shoot over anybody, right? He's more probably a better bailout option than what Cam Johnson brings you, but for what they paid for Cam Johnson, I think that is a great deal and a really solid fit for the Nuggets team that they are going to be a contender, really no matter what, right? If you have Jokic, they are going to have the ability to contend, and I think that this move could ultimately swing a title, as crazy as it sounds. So that is my award for most impactful move. Moving on to our next superlative here, we have the biggest surprise, the most shocked that I've been at any point during this NBA offseason was when the Bucks made the decision to release Damian Lillard. So, what the Bucks did in the wake of Dame's Achilles injury in round 1 of this past postseason is that they are going to give the old waive and stretch. So what that means is they are going to waive Damian Lillard and they're going to stretch the remaining amount on his contract over the next, I want to say, 5 seasons. I believe they said the next 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. So Dame is going to be getting paid out $20-ish million per year for like the next 5 years in dead cap to the Milwaukee Bucks. So Dame still gets his money, but they are paying him to not play basketball. And they were able to take on that flexibility right away. And so subsequently, they went on to sign Miles Turner to a 4-year, $107 million contract. And again, this news basically happened like back-to-back. Like the Bucks would have had no ability whatsoever to go out and re-sign anybody for 4 years, $107 million, like what they did with Miles Turner. But it was basically a one-to-one swap, right? The Bucks probably did this deal moving on, making the decision to move on from Dame Lillard because they knew that was how they were going to bring in Miles Turner. So like those two transactions rolled together was easily the biggest shock, right? And there were some weird reports that came out immediately after Dame was waived and stretched, mostly coming from Chris Haynes. So apparently the report that Chris Haynes put out was that Giannis was actually upset with the Bucks for releasing Damian Lillard. So that was kind of interesting that somebody close to Dame's camp would release that information. Maybe that's just what Dame wanted to have out, but it seems like that report has been mostly debunked. There hasn't been too much public outrage from Giannis ever since the Bucks made this decision about a week ago, but it's still really surprising nonetheless. It's surprising to me because I didn't even know you can do that, right? Like there's just so many little tidbits with this salary cap, and I don't think that this is necessarily like a new move that you can do. Like the wave and stretch has always been a thing, but it's certainly less popular now. But it's just a really desperate move by the Bucks is really what it is, right? Like they just want to get competitive right now. They want to show Giannis that they're serious about trying to win this year. And so they made the tough decision to move on from a guy that did nothing wrong to the team, to the franchise, anything like that. I think Dame was pretty productive and it wasn't his fault that that deal didn't work out, but the poor guy gets hurt and now he's looking for a job with a different team. And so we'll talk more about Damian Lillard in a bit, but I do think that's a pretty shocking move. I do think Miles Turner is obviously a significant upgrade over Brook Lopez for what it's worth, but when we're talking about moving the needle forward for the Bucks next year, like, yes, your front court is absolutely filthy with Giannis and Miles Turner, and, you know, I think they re-signed Jericho Sims. It's like a big off the bench, and they lost Brook Lopez, but that's not really making anybody scared, even in a really soft East, right? You're still asking a lot from guys like KPJ. We talked about Gary Trent. They re-signed for cheap. Like, that's great, but it's still mostly a skeleton crew for this Bucks team outside of their front court, and to not have that guy that you really trust as a primary ball handler, I just don't know where the points are going to come from and what that guard rotation is going to look like for the Bucks for them to actually be a real threat, even in a very weak East. So overall, I don't like it for the Bucks, but if it allows them to retain Giannis, if they're happy just being as competitive as possible over the next 5 years, like, I guess go for it, right? At least you picked up a valuable asset that you weren't going to have any ability to get in Miles Turner. And look, with the market for centers out there, even if it doesn't work out for Turner this year, you can flip him. He's got a tradable contract next year. So I don't hate it as much as maybe some others did when this move first came out. I do think it's desperate for the Bucks. Maybe they'd be better off if they just tore it down to the studs and rebuilt everybody. But nonetheless, they're going to be paying Dame Lillard $20 million in dead cap over the next 5 seasons. So you'd think that they still have an idea of how to be competitive. We'll see if it works out for them, but it was certainly a shock to see Damian Lillard get released. The next superlative we have here is worst contract. This is pretty self-explanatory. It is the worst contract that I have seen signed during this free agency cycle. And the winner goes to Jakob Poeltl and the Toronto Raptors. Now, again, this is no shade at Poeltl. Go get your bag. Shout out to Jakob Poeltl's agent. But I do not think Jakob Poeltl is worthy of a 4-year, $104 million extension. So over $25 million a year for Jakob Poeltl, who's already under contract for like another season or two anyway. And so he's basically adding in an extra 3 years to his deal is what it comes out to. But I just don't know why you want to be locked into Jakob Poeltl into his early 30s. Like, I understand that everybody seems to need a center right about now, and the Raptors didn't lose their guy, but like, what are you doing if you're Toronto? You're just spending so much money on just a completely mid starting lineup, and Jakob Poeltl is no exception to that. But I don't know why you had to go out and pay him now. I think he was under contract anyway, and maybe I just haven't watched enough Raptors to appreciate how good Poeltl is, but I just don't think he's anything spectacular, and him signing for like the same amount as a guy like Naz Reid and in the same ballpark as like Julius Randle just makes me scratch my head if I'm the Toronto Raptors. So the next superlative here we have is called the fuck, because that's exactly what I did when I looked at what the Kings have done this offseason in total. Just like the fuck did you do that for? That's how I feel about the Kings right now. They signed Dennis Schroeder, who's on team number 10, mind you, 3 years, $45 million. A little secret for you, if somebody's on their 10th team, and I like Schroeder for what he's worth, he is a valuable player, he deserves to be on an NBA team, whatever. If he's on team number 10, he cannot possibly help your team enough to deserve a $15 million a year contract. He just can't. You have Malik Monk there on the Kings, you have Zach LaVine, you have DeMar DeRozan. Don't you have enough guys that want the ball, that can handle the ball, that can create a shot? Like, I know Schroeder's more of a traditional point guard, whatever. 3 years, $45 million is a terrible overpay for a completely middling team. They also went out and traded Jonas Valanciunas to the Nuggets in exchange for Dario Saric. I don't know if they just don't get many Nuggets games in Sacramento, but Saric simply doesn't play for the Nuggets. Like, did not crack a horrendous rotation in the postseason that was desperately one guy short, and Saric couldn't do that. And at least Valanciunas, I know that he's not like the best, certainly not a very modern player. Like, you're wondering how his game has aged as well as it had. Like, is that eventually going to come to an end? We don't have to ask ourselves that question because we saw Jonas Valanciunas play this past year. We didn't see that with Dario Saric. Those two deals, Schroeder, 3 for $45 million, trading Jonas Valanciunas for Dario Saric, that gets you the fuck superlative, because that's really all I can say when I think about the Sacramento Kings. Moving on to a more traditional superlative, we have most likely to succeed. This is one that I awarded to Bruce Brown of the Denver Nuggets. Yes, that is right. Bruce Brown has re-signed, or I guess signed again, with the Denver Nuggets. He obviously was a part of that 2023 championship team. Then he went out and got his bag from the Indiana Pacers. Then the Pacers traded him just a few short months later, and he ended up being sent to Toronto, and he was a part of that Pascal Siakam deal. Then I think he ended up with the Pelicans at some point last season. He kind of bounced around. He had some moments on League Pass, really like 1 or 2 moments that I saw anyways, but I think the guy can still play. Obviously, he probably got gassed up and didn't really deserve the contract that he got from the Pacers, but I think he is the most likely to succeed because we saw him succeed with Denver before. It's not going out on a limb to saying just because the guy is 2 years older doesn't mean he's totally washed. I think he can be a really great bench option for a Nuggets team that needs guys that are smart basketball players, know how to cut. He was even mostly like their backup point guard in a lot of ways for that 2023 championship Nuggets team. So I think he is right back in a situation to succeed. Sometimes you got to bounce around and get that money and play in some not so great basketball situations, but he found his way right back home in Denver with Nikola Jokic, and I think it's going to work out really well. Keeping it moving to our next superlative, another traditional one here, we have the class clown. In this free agency cycle, the only class clown that I can think of is the Indiana Pacers owner. And after a quick Google search, I can tell you that his name is Herb Simon, it appears. But the reason why Herb is our class clown is because even despite the Pacers having one of the most miraculous sports seasons ever, really one of the craziest NBA postseason runs relative to expectations that I can remember, making it all the way to Game 7 of the NBA Finals just to tragically have their star player tear his Achilles in front of everybody right at the start of the game. You would think that that team would have a little bit more grace and care when putting together the roster for future seasons, but that doesn't apply for our guy Herb right here, because even despite the incredible success of the team, and I know you can use the Halliburton injury as an excuse to not pay people this offseason, but I do think your number one concern should be not losing assets for nothing. And that's exactly what the Pacers did in the situation of Miles Turner. And look, the situation is that they probably would have had to go into the luxury tax to pay Miles Turner, which apparently the guy hasn't done in over 2 decades. So when you have a cheap owner like that for an asset that just continuously makes money and grows in value year over year, I just have to think you're a clown. Like, you can talk about how like the team might lose money operationally year to year, but if you own the team and your asset is just constantly going up in value, you can't really bitch and moan that the team was under that green line for 1 year, especially after a year where the team made it all the way to the Game 7 of the NBA Finals, so we know that that was not the case. You would think that the guy would care a little bit more about the fans, care about not losing an asset for nothing in Miles Turner. 4 years, $107 million, what the Bucks paid to him was not that much. You could have done $20 million a year for Miles Turner for 4 years. You could have given him 4 for 80. He might have even taken that to stay where he wanted to stay in Indiana, and we just didn't even have that opportunity because Herb Simon decided to be the class clown. So the number one thing is, like, look, I get that Turner was, pretty up and down during that postseason run. He obviously wasn't hitting many shots in the finals. He's probably the guy I would look to improve on if I'm looking at that Pacers roster, but that doesn't mean that you lose the asset for nothing, because now you're just one center worse than where you are before, and all you have to show for it is a little bit more cap space that realistically you guys haven't done much with in the past anyway. So I just don't like the move to lose that asset for nothing, especially after the season that the Pacers just had. Next superlative we have here is a simple one: best trade. The trade that I think is the best for the team that came out on top, right? What team do I like the most? All things considered, the price that they paid, the situation of all these teams, and it's hard to pick one winner because I think we had a lot of great trades out there. But I'm actually going to give this one to the Washington Wizards for a deal that just took place a couple days ago at this point, because they went out and acquired Cam Whitmore from the Houston Rockets in exchange for just a couple of second-round picks. So they went out and got a guy that I think was like a late lottery guy, or at least he was supposed to be an early lottery guy that went to the Rockets 2 years ago, fell a bit in the draft because of injuries, hasn't gotten a ton of consistent minutes just because of how loaded that Rockets team is, especially at the wing positions. And they went out and sent the guy a life raft, right? I do think it's one of those situations where the price for Cam Whitmore was so insanely low. Like 2 second-round picks is basically nothing in this NBA to get a guy who, again, we don't even know what he could be. He's obviously super young. I think he's really special and has a special ability as a scorer and as an athlete. Like, that guy is just so fun to watch. That is the perfect swing to take if you're the Washington Wizards. And I think that price was so low because the Rockets probably wanted to do right by him, maybe do right by the agent. It just feels like there was some thought put into where they were going to send the guy in a developmental situation where he could get a lot of minutes, get a lot of shots. Probably one where the team kind of worked with the agent a bit on that one and did him a favor. But nonetheless, the Wizards were the ones that were smart enough to make that call, pull off that deal, and they were the ones that ended up paying only 2 second-round picks for a guy that could end up being a really, really solid NBA player. So, love that move for the Washington Wizards. Obviously, I don't like it for the Rockets, but I'm not going to kill them too much because I think the Rockets have had an awesome offseason, and based on their other moves, there weren't going to be a lot of minutes for Cam Whitmore anyways. That situation was probably going to get ugly one way or the other. They did right by the guy, sent him to Washington, and they were able to capitalize. Love that move. That is the award for best trade goes to the Wizards. Class mice, another superlative out there for, that quiet kid in your school that didn't really talk to anybody. I'm going to give this award to Golden State. Are you guys awake? Are you out there, right? You have Steph Curry. Haven't made a lot of moves this offseason, just doing a quick pulse check on Golden State, because outside of them losing Kevon Looney in free agency, off the top of my head, I can't think of one single thing that they did this summer. Kuminga buzz that could take place, and more drama to come later in the offseason. But so far, Golden State has done nothing. So they get class mice. Most dramatic, right? Maybe even a class thespian, right? Did you have that award at your high school? But my award for the most dramatic character of this offseason, we'll say, is LeBron James. It feels like every single summer, LeBron has to make sure he is in headlines one way or the other. And this year he made some headlines because he made the decision to pick up his own $53 million player option for this season. The reason that that is significant is because LeBron has basically been living on a series of 1+1 contracts over the better part of like a decade and a half at this point in time, where he never really lets himself get to the spot where he can just like go to unrestricted free agency. He usually signs like 1 year ahead and will sign like an extra 1+1, so he has the player option for the following year. But this year, it seemed like he showed a little bit of frustration. The Lakers front office decided to just pick up that option and put himself in a situation where he, as all things stand right now, will be an unrestricted free agent heading into next year. But on top of that, he did the thing where he just kind of like applied a little bit of pressure outwardly to the Lakers front office. I didn't see the exact quote, but was basically just making sure the Lakers were, doing everything that it took for them to have a competitive team and make the roster better. Basically LeBron's way of just expressing dissatisfaction with what the Lakers have done so far. And the reason this rubbed me the wrong way, not that I was surprised, right? LeBron basically does something in this vein every single offseason. It's just like, man, you can't give Pelinka a crumb of credit for going out and turning Anthony Davis into Luka Doncic. Look, I know that doesn't necessarily complement LeBron's game, maybe as much as AD did, and maybe LeBron doesn't care as much about the long-term value with what Pelinka did for the franchise by getting a guy like Luka Doncic, because LeBron is basically 40, he's 40 on the nose, right? Turning 41 this season. Like, he doesn't really care what the Lakers are going to look like 5 years from now. And I get all that, but man, you don't have to do the whole thing where like, we got to keep our front office on their toes. We don't have to apply this pressure. Like, does it really work when LeBron does that? Maybe it worked back in the day when he was like 28 in Cleveland or, 30, whatever in Miami he was. Like, I can't keep track of his timeline, but I just feel like it doesn't have the same effect when the guy is 40 years old. He's a fantastic player, still like a top 10 to 15 player in the NBA, but he's not even the best player on his team anymore. While they need to make a lot of moves this offseason, while they should get better and build that core, easier said than done. And they just made a really awesome move at the deadline last year. Like, cut Pelinka and the front office some break. We don't need to hear this bullshit coming out of LeBron's camp every single offseason, but that's why I gave LeBron the award for most dramatic. Moving on to the next superlative here. If we had a best trade, we have to have a worst trade, right? And the worst trade that took place throughout this entire offseason is one that I already talked about. The trade between the Pelicans and the Hawks on draft night. Not going to spend a lot of time on this because I covered it on my last podcast, but if you did miss it, the Pelicans traded their 2026 unprotected first-round pick to move up from the number 23 pick in the draft all the way up to the number 13 pick in the draft. They used that pick to select Derek Queen. He could be a great player in his own right. The problem is that first-round pick is likely going to be top 10, could even be top 5. I have no confidence in what the Pelicans are going to look like as an organization next year. And even if the Pelicans are somehow good, there's a chance that the deal still blows up in their face because that pick that they traded is not only a 26 unprotected, it's also the most favorable pick between the Pelicans and the Bucks. So if the Bucks somehow bottom out or they make the decision to trade Giannis later this offseason, then that asset becomes even more valuable for the Hawks. So that was, no doubt about it, the worst trade that we've seen this offseason. There's actually been more news that has come out since that trade saying that the Hawks front office demanded that Joe Dumars himself was the one on the phone because they actually could not believe the pick that they were offering was unprotected. Atlanta front office didn't even believe that could be real. So that tells you everything you need to know about just how bad that trade was. Moving on, we have another superlative here that is more traditional, the class couple awards. What do the class couples do? They stay together, or maybe they get back together. And that's what happened here with Clint Capella and the Houston Rockets. Clint was drafted by the Rockets. What was that, back in 2014, 15, something like that. He's been in the league for a while, right? He was drafted by the Rockets a while back. Then he signed with the Hawks and played there for several years, but now he is back with the Rockets on a 3-year, $21 million contract. I thought this one was funny, maybe a sign of true love, just because the Rockets had no business going out and acquiring another center, right? They had actually already re-signed Steven Adams to a 3-year, $39 million contract earlier in the offseason. They obviously have Şengün, who's one of their foundational pieces. He's not going anywhere. And now they get a third traditional center. And that's the thing, is all these guys are centers. Şengün's really only going to play the center position. I guess you could argue him at the 4 because he is more skilled, and we did see him unlock that double big lineup with Adams, but whatever. Adams is definitely a 5, Capella is definitely a 5. Now they have 3 of those guys in the same team. So they must have just really loved Clint Capella if they felt like they needed to go out and get that guy. $7 million a year for his services, even though he's declined quite a bit as a player, is still pretty solid. Maybe they just were looking at in the business of picking up assets, right? The fact that they had the cap space to do this, knows that everybody's always looking for a cheap big man. If Capella can have a strong start to the year, maybe he's a flip candidate, but I did have to give them the award for class couples because, it's just beautiful to see Capella and the Rockets get back together like that. So moving on to our next superlative here, we have best value, aka best contract. I just think that all things considered, when we have all these contracts going around, if you really wanted to say best contract, it's probably the one that Shea signed just because he's one of the best players in the world. Anytime you can re-sign an elite player in the world like that, you do that. But that's not really where the value is. The value is in these guys that come off the bench, guys that are flying under the radar. And I think the award for best value of this NBA offseason has to go to Ty Jerome, now of the Memphis Grizzlies. He signed in Memphis on a 3-year, $28 million contract, so basically $9 million a year. And I know Ty Jerome was awful during the playoffs. He was so bad in that second round against Indiana. He was asked to do a lot more with Garland hurt. He was asked to start a few games, and he just, I don't think, had a single game where he played to his standards, to his ability. He was awful. But that being said, in the regular season, he was a special player. He was my top 3 for 6th man of the year. I think I had him right behind Peyton Pritchard and Malik Beasley. I think the guy was fantastic all year long. A great plus shooter from the outside, could also come in, create his own shot. He has one of those really fun to watch floaters, really efficient, just kind of running that offense and everything like that. I just think everything Ty Jerome did last year was super impressive. And I think the playoffs actually hurt him too much, right? I think people took too much stock in that postseason performance, because I swear before that postseason performance, he probably would have been looking at like maybe close to $20 million a year. I think that got cut in half by his postseason efforts. And I think Memphis, being savvy, swiping him up for 3 years, $28 million is a no-brainer deal. Every team in the NBA should be willing to pay Ty Jerome that. They already have a great guard situation, obviously, with Ja Morant there. They also have Scottie Pippen Jr., who I really like, coming off the bench behind Ja Morant. So they didn't even need a traditional backup point guard, but I think 3 years, $28 million. If you're Orlando, if you're a team like Detroit, I'd rather see some money go to Ty Jerome there. I just think there's a lot of other teams that could utilize Ty Jerome if you need another guard, if you need another creator. I can't believe his market was that low. That's a fantastic contract from the Memphis front office. Moving on to my final superlative here. This is the one that I had to give out for school spirit, right? Every year you have a most spirited award that goes out, somebody that really gives a shit about every game, cheering their ass off in the stands. I wanted to give this one to the team that was most emblematic of school spirit. And this year it was the Minnesota Timberwolves, because they decided to basically run it back in the best way they could. They did lose Nickeil Alexander-Walker to the Hawks, but beyond that, they went out and re-signed 3 of their players for last year that were up for contract extensions. Starting off with Naz Reid, he signed a 5-year, $125 million contract. I think this was also a fitting award because people in Minnesota just love Naz Reid so fucking much. It's hard to explain. People will walk around Minnesota greeting each other just by saying Naz Reid, and then they'll just like nod back, and the other guy will just also say Naz Reid. I mean, good for him, right? He's a hometown guy. I think that contract might end up looking actually a little bit like an underpay for Naz Reid if he continues to develop. Like, that guy is just so skilled at 6'9", can just do really everything on a court. I just love watching Naz Reid, but I think it's a fair contract for both sides. I really love it. They also re-signed Julius Randle for 3 years, $100 million, which I know Randle is certainly a flawed player, depending on what night you watch him, like the body language and just his attitude, his demeanor on the court can be really damaging. But other nights he looks like an all-NBA player, like he did in round 1 and round 2, where he dominated a matchup against LeBron James in round 1, and then in round 2, one of the best series of his entire career against a defensive player of the year in Draymond Green. Like, Julius Randle was so awesome during those first 2 rounds. Like, again, I know he was pretty bad against OKC. That's also the product of going up against an elite defense in round 3 at that point. But Randle proved a lot of people wrong this offseason. I think paying $33 million a year for a guy that does have that ceiling is really fair. And then finally, they brought back Uncle Joe. Joe Ingles re-signed in Minnesota for a 1-year, $3.6 million contract. And I get why the Wolves would have such great school spirit, so to speak, if I were them as well. Again, making it to the Western Conference Finals 2 years in a row. Your best player in Anthony Edwards just continues to ascend. Now, I don't think the Wolves are necessarily favorites to come out of the West, but I do think with their best player being so young in Anthony Edwards, continuing to grow each and every year, they don't have to make crazy swings every offseason. Clearly what they're doing is working to an extent. Hopefully Ant can just get to the point where he improves enough where they get there organically and are, favorites coming out of the West just because of his ascension alone, but they can tweak some things around the roster here and there, but more or less are committed to the core of Anthony Edwards, Naz Reid, and Julius Randle for the next several years. That Jaden McDaniels contract is awesome as well. I just like what the Wolves are doing, and even though they're not the favorites coming out of the West, I think it makes sense that they wanted to go out and re-sign their guys after the awesome seasons that they've had the past 2 years. So before I let you guys go, I need to go through my top 3 winners and my top 3 losers of the NBA offseason so far. Again, understanding it's the middle of July when we're talking to you guys about all this. Nothing is final. All these teams can make significant moves that either improve or tank their offseason grades so far. But we're at a pretty good stopping point to evaluate the draft, evaluate free agency, and tell you what teams have won and lost the most. Let's start with the winners. Let's start off being positive. At my number 3 spot on my top winners of the offseason list, I have to go with the Atlanta Hawks. I think overall they've had a fantastic offseason, starting with the move to trade for Kristaps Porzingis. I think this was objectively a risky decision, right? I think they ended up having to give up a first-round pick, mainly get off of Terrence Mann's contract. They also traded away George Niang. In return, they bring back Kristaps Porzingis, and I think that's a guy that, unlike any player that Trey has played with throughout his entire career, he's a great lob threat, he's a great rim protector, but he can also space the floor and shoot the 3 ball at a really high clip when he's healthy. The ceiling of that guy is ridiculous. He was an X factor for my Celtics team, even though it never really worked out in the playoffs. He can be an X factor for the Hawks as well. I think it definitely makes sense for them to make that swing for 1 year. And even if it doesn't work out, maybe he'd be more inclined to stay in Atlanta for a cheap re-sign. Who knows? But somebody's going to talk themselves into Kristaps every single year. At least he gives you a real ceiling, and you still have a Okongwu at that center position to eat up a lot of minutes and keep Kristaps healthy for hopefully April, May, if the Hawks make it that far. The next move that they made, again, we've talked about it a bunch, the trade they did with the Pelicans on draft night. The Hawks were the beneficiary of that, right? They traded back 10 spots in the draft, going from 13 to 23, and they pick up a pick that is next year's unprotected first-round pick of either the Bucks or the Pelicans, whatever one is more favorable. That is a home run swing, a home run asset that they were able to bring into that building. As the Bucks season goes along, as the Pelican season goes along, I feel like that pick is only going to gain more value, so I am huge on that deal for the Hawks. They also signed Luke Kennard to a 1-year, $11 million contract. I love that. I've always loved Luke Kennard. Maybe it's a Duke thing, I don't really know, but the guy can shoot the ball at a really high clip, has great size on him as well, a little bit underrated defensively, if I do say so myself. I think he's going to fit in nicely with the Hawks and give them guaranteed high-level three-point shooting off the bench. And then finally, they also signed Nickeil Alexander-Walker from the Minnesota Timberwolves on a 4-year, $62 million contract. This was technically a sign-and-trade that they were able to do to provide some financial flexibility to the Wolves, I'm sure. But either way, $15 million a year for 4 years for NAW is something I like. I mean, he's been a great playoff guy for the Wolves the past couple years. He was really the only guy that really brought his play up to another level when he played against the Thunder in the playoffs. You guys may have heard it on the broadcast 100 times that he's actually cousins with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, so took a lot of pride in guarding Shai in that matchup and actually had some really great scoring efforts himself on the other end of the court. So just a guy that defends at a high level just to put around Trae Young and reduce his defensive workload even more. He's going to fit in really nicely with Jalen Johnson, with Dyson Daniels. Like, that team is loaded with defensive-minded guards and wings to make Trae look a lot better. So it's a great situation as a whole on the offseason for the Hawks, and they're going to be in a real situation to make some noise in the East next year. Moving on to another team that I think dominated this offseason, the Denver Nuggets, right? It starts off with that move, swapping MPJ and a future first-round pick into Cam Johnson. Already talked about why I think that's a no-brainer move for the Nuggets. Also working around the fringes to bring back Bruce Brown, a guy that was a part of that 2023 title team, can be awesome off that second unit, and just another guy that the Nuggets actually trust. They turned a guy in Dario Saric, who didn't play at all for them this past year, into Jonas Valanciunas, who right away is probably the best backup that Jokic has had in a long time, maybe since Nurkic in those early Nuggets years, everything like that. But Yoval can definitely play, is a big body that can give you big rebound numbers and can definitely score his own buckets in the post as well. And then finally, the Nuggets also signed Tim Hardaway Jr. on a 1-year contract. Now, this is clear, like, Nuggets bias talking to you guys here because I've never liked Tim Hardaway Jr., but it's pretty simple, right? You put good shooters around Jokic and they get even better. They're more open than what they've ever been. And I just think that's a no-brainer fit to have a guy that, even though Malik Beasley took a lot of that shine last year in Detroit, I think Tim Hardaway Jr. had a pretty solid season in his own right, and he is going to be another guy that the Nuggets can go out there to trust to take shots in big spots. Will Tim Hardaway Jr. actually make them? I don't know, but at least he's going to take the shot. He's going to shoot the ball well in the regular season. And in total, right, you're upgrading that MPJ spot. You're adding 3 more players to your rotation in Valanciunas, Bruce Brown, and Tim Hardaway Jr. And realistically, the only guy that the Nuggets are going to lose from their rotation is Westbrook. I think that is a no-brainer upgrade for the Nuggets across the board. They are a much better team, especially when you layer in, like, maybe Jamal Murray is a little bit healthier this year. Maybe Peyton Watson and Julian Strawther continue to develop. They also had a guy in Deron Holmes who they drafted in the first round last year that, unfortunately, I think he had like an ACL or an Achilles injury, something like that, before the season even started last year. So that they were down a big man all season long just from that alone. They'll get Holmes back in the mix. I think there's a lot of different ways that the Nuggets get a lot better, and it is a massive win for a team that was a lot closer than what people realized, right? That was mostly a throwaway year where they fired the coach, they fired the GM. Now they make these roster changes. I could easily see myself taking the Nuggets to win it all next year, with these moves being the main reason why. So, keeping it moving, we do have one more team that I believe won the offseason more than anyone else, and that's the Houston Rockets, right? I'd love to sit here and zag on you guys and pick somebody else besides the Rockets, but the reality is the Rockets were the perfect team to go out and trade for Kevin Durant. They were literally a Kevin Durant away from being a contender, in my opinion. And to remind you guys what they gave up in that Kevin Durant deal, they traded away Dylan Brooks, Jalen Green, and the number 10 pick in this year's draft, which became Malawak. They also re-signed Jabari Smith to a 5-year, $122 million contract. So basically the same amount as Naz Reid, a little under $25 million a year for Jabari Smith. I really like Smith. I think he plays hard. I think he gives you a lot in the defensive end. He's a better rebounder than what people realize. He's a huge body, and he's a great shooter. And I think he is the perfect guy that can learn a little bit from Kevin Durant. He's never going to handle the ball quite like Kevin Durant. He's, not going to have the same individual skill set or scoring prowess, anything like that. But he could learn a lot as somebody in that build, how to be proficient, where to go on the court, all those little things that Durant has mastered in his, nearly 20 years in the NBA. I just think that is a really fun stylistic fit for Jabari Smith to be sharing the court with Kevin Durant, and I think that should make the Rockets feel even better about his growth and development. They stole Dorian Finney-Smith from the Lakers, signing him to a 4-year, $53 million contract. DFS is always a really great 3-and-D option. Ime Udoka is going to love that guy and just adds to a very great defensive team already. Like, think about the wings in Houston with Kevin Durant, Jabari Smith, Dorian Finney-Smith, Tari Eason, Amen Thompson. Like, it's stupid the amount of depth that they have at that position. Again, they also signed Steven Adams to a 3-year, $39 million contract. Adams, basically revived his career last year in Houston and had that awesome 2-big lineup with Şengün in the playoffs. That's going to be huge for the Rockets next year as well. They restructured Fred VanVleet's deal, and then he re-signed a 2-year, $50 million contract. So that was a very team-friendly move by FVV to stay in Houston. The fact that he was able to take a bit of a pay cut and $25 million a year for 2 years for VanVleet for what he is at this point in his career is a very, very fair price. I love that for the Rockets. And then finally, the only move I didn't like, again, was them trading away Cam Whitmore for 2 second-round picks. But I think at that point, they just knew that there weren't going to be enough minutes for that guy. Him and his agent weren't going to be happy. It was going to become a nasty situation. So they moved on from him, but at least there's still minutes for Reed Shepherd to play a bit this year as well. So I think the Rockets, even though they were awesome in the regular season last year, nobody took them seriously as a contender. Now, as we sit here and record this, I think they're are probably going to have the second or at worst the third best odds coming out of the West next year. And I think if we're just looking at in total talent, the Rockets are immediately better than every team in the East, right? They're a top 3 talent situation overall as well. Great head coach. Going to be a challenge for them to pull all the right strings. And I just realized I forgot about the Clint Capella contract as well, 3 years, $21 million. So the Rockets really loaded up this offseason. It's all on Ime to pull the right strings, but I think they're going to have an extremely competitive team next year. Now let's talk about the losers of the offseason. This is arguably a little bit more fun, but not for me right now, because at the number 3 spot, I have my Boston Celtics. I think it's really hard to argue that they've been anything but a loser this offseason. I mean, if I really wanted to drink the Kool-Aid and spin it like, oh, well, think about the way they were able to dump Drew and Porzingis without giving up any extra assets and all the financial flexibility that they have. I don't care, man. I'm a basketball fan. I'm trying to tell you what teams got worse. The Celtics got worse. Now, we knew they were going to get worse, and we knew they were basically screwed no matter what because of that Tatum injury, but the reality is setting in quick. That a couple of weeks ago, I probably would have told you that, hey, look, like, if we keep most of the core in place, maybe we still lose Drew and Porzingis, but if we find suitable replacements, we still have JB, we still have Derek White, we still have a great coach and some solid depth, maybe we can still be top 5 in the East. I'm looking at this roster next year, and it is pretty freaking gross, even though I love Derek White and Jaylen Brown. Like, this is just simply not a good team. It's really rooted in that front court situation with how bad our bigs are, but to give you guys a bird's eye view of what took place this offseason, we turned Drew Holiday into Anthony Simons. Originally, there were some second-round picks in that deal. Now there aren't, so that was just a one-for-one swap, which it still is what it is. I'm not a big Simons guy. I don't really think he fits what we do, but he's a talented player. He's younger. He makes less money, and he's under contract for a shorter amount of time. So that's still a win to trade Drew Holiday and his big contract for that. We traded Porzingis into George Niang, essentially, right? Who makes way less money. Hate George Niang. Hope he doesn't have a spot on the team, but he is a solid NBA player. He's a plus 3-point shooter, whatever. That was a salary dump as well. We did lose Luke Cornett. Luke Cornett signed a 4-year, $41 million contract with the Spurs to be Wemby's backup. Really hard to not be happy for that guy. I mean, he was a character, like, really unique, kind of nerdy dude that the fan base just loved Cornette. So good for him, because he was almost out of the league, and now he's making life-changing money, 4 years, $41 million, and he's in a fun situation, so I get why Cornette left. It's looking very likely that we're going to lose Al Horford. Brad Stevens said in a press conference today it's unlikely to sign him. The buzz is that he's going to Golden State. I'm sure Al just wants to be competitive every remaining year of his career. I mean, maybe he comes back the year after next when Tatum's back. I wouldn't completely write that off, but it is going to be a bummer if we have to say goodbye to Al Horford after what has already been a very emotional offseason. We signed Luka Garza to a 1-year, $5 million contract. Okay, he was a dominant college player back up in Minnesota. Don't really know much besides that because the Wolves had other great bigs. We also stole another Timberwolves bench player. We signed Josh Minot to a 2-year, $5 million contract. I got to text my guy Garrett and get the scoop on these guys. I really know nothing about them, but yeah, that's the offseason. Turning Holiday, Porzingis, Cornette, and Horford into Anthony Simons, George Niang, Luka Garza, and Josh Minot as of right now. And then we drafted Amari Williams and Hugo Gonzalez. So I don't know, man. We're going to stink pretty bad next year the way it's looking like. Like, this center rotation is disgusting. Like, Luka Garza, Amari Williams, who's a rookie second-round pick, Kada and Tillman are the worst centers in basketball. Make no mistake about it. So, yeah, it's just going to be really gross. I mean, maybe we try to make some moves to get some centers in the building so we have someone on the roster for 2027 when Tatum's back. But right now, this Celtics offseason is a major loss as of right now. But it's a planned loss. Maybe it's a tank, maybe it's a retool, whatever. But it's not good for my C's right now. So they're on this list. The second biggest loser of the offseason, I'm still not going to put us lower than the Sacramento Kings because the Kings still exist, right? We talked about it before. They overpaid for Dennis Schroeder. They took a player that did play and contribute in Jonas Valanciunas and turned him into Dario Saric, who could not play and did not contribute for the Nuggets. And then they're just generally ass. I think that vibes in Sacramento are really bad. Watching what Halliburton has turned into, watching Fox still be really productive for the Spurs last year. Like, the Kings are just in a bad spot, and they've done nothing to improve. And if anything, their moves have been even more confusing since this past season ended. And then finally, my biggest loser of the offseason. And you guys can let me know if I'm being too critical here. But I have the Los Angeles Lakers. A lot of this is relative to expectations when we think back to the trade deadline last year, making that incredible move to turn AD and Max Christie or whatever into Luka Doncic. Like, that is such a massive play. And everybody's like, look, Rob's just getting started. Like, wait till he can really have a full offseason to build this team around Luka and get some bigs here. What the Lakers ended up with was not great this offseason, in my opinion. They lost Dorian Finney-Smith, which I think was a pretty big surprise, especially the extra slap in the face. He's still in the West, and he's playing for the Rockets, making them even better. I think that's just a tremendous loss for a Lakers team that desperately lacks perimeter defense. They just lost their best guy. Yes, they signed Jake LaRavia, 2 for 12. That's a good, cheap swing. Good for them, but I don't know if that's going to be a needle mover. Their answer at the center position was DeAndre Ayton. I was trying to find a way to work this into the awards or whatnot, but Ayton was actually bought out by the Blazers. They paid him like almost $30 million to just like fuck off and join whatever team he wanted, which is a terrible sign and tells you all about what you need to know as DeAndre Ayton as a player. Not necessarily a winner, not necessarily a high effort guy. That's been the bugaboo his entire career, but he does have crazy tools, right? They signed him to a 2-year, $16 million contract, so a really cheap deal to get DeAndre Ayton. It's not a lot of risk there, but they didn't have any other answers, right? Like, this guy's had a work ethic problem. He's definitely not going to help them that much on the defensive end of the court. It is pretty funny that he's a pretty similar type of player to Mark Williams, right? Like, he's a little bit more durable, I guess. Maybe doesn't work as hard as what Mark Williams does, but whatever. They still ended up with that type of player. They did re-sign Jackson Hayes, but like that was it, right? Like, their answer at the center position is DeAndre Ayton, who has not been anybody's answer throughout his entire career since being taken number 1 overall in 2018. So he gets to play with Luka. He gets to benefit from those incredible lobs from Luka and LeBron. Like, he's going to be in a great, advantageous basketball situation. I just think for what people were expecting with the Lakers and just like these massive concerns with the team on the defensive end of the court, where do you rank the Lakers next year, right? I think they have to be behind the Thunder and the Rockets and the Nuggets and the Timberwolves, right? So right there, they're like, what, a 5 seed at best? And that's not including any sort of bump from the Spurs. That's not including any sort of bump from the Mavericks now that they have Cooper Flag and once Kyrie comes back in the mix. I mean, there's just a lot of teams in the Western Conference right now that I would take over the Lakers, at least 5 and maybe even more. And I don't know how they change what is going on with the Lakers defensively right now. And it's a really tall task for JJ Redick to be the one to figure it all out. And now I could look dumb saying this because Luka could be that good on his own. Luka and LeBron together on their own could be that good, but I just don't know if DeAndre Ayton is going to be the savior here, because that's what you're asking him to do, because the Lakers just don't seem to have any other options at this point in free agency. So I think they're the biggest losers of the offseason so far relative to the expectations that this fan base had for the team. And then finally, one more exercise for you guys. We talked about what teams won and lost the most. Let's talk about what players won or lost the most this offseason. Starting with the positive, I think my third biggest winner of the offseason, we just talked about him, was DeAndre Ayton, right? What a career for this guy. I think there was a famous quote of Ayton that has circulated since he was signed by the Lakers, basically saying, what does a successful career look like for DeAndre Ayton? Someone asked him this on draft night back in 2018. He said making it to his second contract. Now, I totally get that, right? Like, again, that's where the real life-changing money comes into play, and obviously Ayton did that. He's made it to, like, his third contract now or whatever, so good for him for reaching his goal. But that is not, like, that killer mentality you want of an NBA player, and especially not the number 1 overall pick, right? Like, dude, you're the number 1 overall pick. You would really have to fuck this up to not make it to your second contract, especially when you're 7 feet tall and look like Adonis out there on a basketball court. Like, you're not going to mess it up, right? So why are you already worried about your second contract? Like, that just gives you an idea of where his head's at. But gets bought out by Portland. That money's guaranteed. Gets an extra pay raise on top of that for the $8 million he's getting from the Lakers this year, plus his player option next year. And he goes from having to live in Portland to living in LA and now catching passes from Luka and LeBron. If DeAndre Ayton cannot look good in this situation and get at least, 18, 19, and 12, I think that's like a really disappointing year for DeAndre Ayton if he's not able to at least hit those marks, because he's going to be in such a good basketball situation. There were moments that I talked myself into Jackson Hayes. Now, that was in the regular season, but as like a lob threat offensive guy, he was everything the Lakers needed. Like, Ayton should moonwalk to career best numbers if he actually gives any type of effort whatsoever, and so he is definitely one of the biggest winners of the offseason. My second biggest winner of the offseason, this is a pretty tough resume to beat, it's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He won MVP, scoring title, championship, finals MVP. Now he has a Supermax extension, and he's on the cover of 2K now. The Supermax extension was really the headline there. 4 years, $285 million, so he's making basically $1 million a game. Shai's making roughly $900,000 a game. It's insane. So good for Shai. Much deserved. He's obviously a massive winner of this offseason. But my biggest winner of the offseason so far is Damian Lillard. Now, a lot of people felt bad for him when the news came out that he was being waived and stretched by the Bucks. I know it's not a good look. It's not good for a former All-NBA player to get waived and have that on your resume. But what an opportunity for him. He gets to pick what team he signs with for probably a 2-year contract. If he still has enough leverage to get somebody to sign him for this year, even though he's obviously not going to be playing because he's going to be rehabbing from the Achilles injury, but at least he can pick his preferred rehab destination, milk another year on top of that. So he's going to milk a 2-year contract out of this. And for the first time in his whole career, he has complete control, right? Because he didn't want to go to Milwaukee, right? He bullied his way out of Portland after signing the extension, but never really had full control. He wanted to go to Miami very famously, never got that wish. So let's see if he ends up in Miami in free agency this year or whatever. Or he could just sign with the best team out there. He could sign with OKC. He could sign with a Denver. He could sign with a San Antonio. He could sign with a Boston. There's been a lot of buzz of him having a relationship with Tatum and rehabbing. So I have mixed feelings about this because I can't really think about having Dame Lillard come off the bench when we already have Pritchard, and we just need big guys so desperately right now. Like, the idea of signing a guard is probably not the best idea, but needless to say, Dame is in a really unique situation where he's guaranteed his money. He gets to wipe his hand clean of the Milwaukee situation and pick what spot he wants to finish his career with. Does he go for the most money? Does he go for a championship? I'm assuming it's the latter, but Dame's in a really good spot right now, and I'm very excited to see where he signs, and I'm happy for the guy, because after that Achilles injury, that's brutal, and at least he gets a get-out-of-jail-free card getting out of Milwaukee. Now, the other side of the coin, when we're talking about the 3 biggest losers of the offseason, I guess we're going to end this pod on a negative note. At number 3, I'd probably say Dillon Brooks, right? I think he's always, a big part of his shtick of being the tough guy, of being like the hard-nosed defender type of dude, was just being on competitive teams his entire career, which he mostly has been, right? Like, I'm sure there were a few down years in Memphis or whatever, but for the most part, that guy's been on good teams and really good teams only. And he's going to have to be a part of that Kevin Durant deal, which is a cool thing to have on your resume. It's like, hey, I was traded in part for Kevin Durant, which is pretty sweet, but at the same time, the Rockets are going to be nasty next year, and the Suns are going to be pretty abysmal, and I think it's just going to drive that guy nuts to be in a really bad basketball situation in Phoenix. So Dillon Brooks is number 3. Second biggest loser of the offseason is Michael Porter Jr. Just feel like that guy, being a champion, getting to play alongside Jokic and Murray, perfect basketball situation where he has no pressure to perform because he is, like, at most, like, the 3rd best guy on his team. Really, he was like the 4th best guy on his team, but he was left open. He had a lot of great looks. He had 2 fantastic playmakers getting him easy shots. And now he has to go to Brooklyn and fight off like an army of draft picks to just get a shot off. And Cam Thomas is going to be the primary ball handler. Like, is he going to get any open looks? I don't know, but I think it could get late early, so to speak, for Michael Porter Jr. But make no mistake, the biggest loser of this offseason is Malik Beasley. I mean, goddamn. I don't know if you guys have read any of the stuff about him. I'm not fully up to date on it, but he's being investigated by the NBA and a few other parties as well for some gambling-related incidents pertaining to his own play on the court. So maybe Beasley was in on fixing his stats or fixing games or researching a bunch of stuff right now. But apparently that guy is balls deep in debt. Like, that guy owes a lot of people a lot of money. And he was even apparently, like, promising to pay out his future contract earnings. Like, that guy's in tough spot. And it's really sad, too, because we watched Duncan Robinson literally get the exact contract, like the 3 for 48 or whatever it was, that Duncan Robinson got. Like, that was guaranteed to go to Malik Beasley. Like, he was, in my opinion, the guy that deserved to be 6th man of the year last year, career year, shooting the ball from 3, unheard of stuff off the bench, like Klay Thompson level 3-point shooting from Malik Beasley. And now it's looking more likely than not the guy's going to be out of the league. I make jokes a little bit here, but I genuinely feel awful for that guy. Like, I don't know, maybe he did some other stuff off the court that you can point to that's even worse than it is just like fixing games and getting involved with the wrong people. But it seems like Malik Beasley's in a tough spot and his career is in jeopardy right about now. So I will say I did see him on one of those like weird like loser like streaming things for younger people, and I saw a clip of that at some point during the season last year. So now we know if anybody's streaming with like a bunch of 16-year-olds in their free time, maybe they're down bad for money. Maybe it's a bad sign. So I think Kyrie Irving did that too. Something to look into. I'll leave you guys with that. And before I let you guys go, I did just realize that this is going to be episode 100 of Words with Wallace. So kind of a cool achievement. I can't imagine there's a lot of folks out there that made it to this point in a very long-winded solo free agency yap session, but If you did, I appreciate you guys a lot. I appreciate all the support that I've gotten from friends, from families, from even a few random people here and there that have been able to catch a podcast or seen a clip or supported the show in any capacity. But it's what I love to do, man. It's really cool to have an opportunity to just put content out there and see what comes of it, whether it ends up turning into a bigger expedition than what it is currently. Maybe the podcast grows in popularity. Maybe I'm able to parlay this into a real content creation career opportunity down the line. But I am really grateful for anyone that listens to this podcast and supports the show, or tells me how I do, or gives me suggestions or tips or feedback. Anything is appreciated when it comes to this podcast, and any help that you guys can be. But I appreciate you guys a lot. Anyone that supported the show, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm hoping to do this for a long time. I don't have any plans on stopping this anytime soon, even though 100 episodes is a lot. It's a lot of work, but it is something I enjoy doing. So thank you guys a lot, and I will talk to you guys next week. Peace.